Hi guys, this video is the overview of chapter 16 on process cost accounting. I am going to use problem 16-4b as an example, and that is on page 651 at the bottom. By the way, before we get started, I wanted to mention that we'll be focused solely on the weighted average method for doing process cost accounting. There is also the FIFO method, which is the first in, first out method. We will not be using that. Weighted average works just fine. It's a little bit easier. There's just a couple of less steps. But anyway, so that's something to keep in mind. So I'm following the four-step process that's in your textbook, and I'll describe each step as I go through. I've also provided you with either an Excel worksheet or a PDF worksheet that you can follow along in pencil if you'd like. So let's get started. Obviously, the first thing we always need is a heading. This is the Switch company. And this is the process cost worksheet for the cutting department. This company has a cutting and assembly department, so we're focused on just the cutting department. And the work in process account for the cutting department is what we're going to be tracking through here. So we would have a work in process account for the cutting department, we would have a work in process account for the assembly department, and then of course we'd have finished goods where it goes after it's done assembling. So every department in a process cost system is going to need a work in process account. And this is for the month ended December 31, 2019. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put in the inputs on the debit side of the work in process account. The first thing is we had some beginning inventory, some beginning work in process inventory, which included direct materials of $7,500 and conversion cost of $49,850. So when we add those together, we get $57,350, and I'm going to plug that in right over here as the beginning balance in work in process. In other words, this is what was in process at the beginning of the month. Now, we are using conversion cost as a grouping of both direct labor and factory overhead. So because they behave the same in most situations, not all, but in most situations, we're just going to lump them together. Now, in a highly automated environment, and that's where we would use a process cost system more, labor really is a fairly small piece of the cost input. The video that I posted about making ice cream cones and ice cream sandwiches, there's not a lot of labor involved. That was very machine oriented. So that shows you that means that we can kind of lump these two together to track them as just a pooled amount of cost. So that's why we're just using the word conversion cost, which includes, again, both the direct labor and the factory overhead. So during the month, we input, or we brought in through a materials requisition form, $112,500 in direct materials. And there was $616,000 worth of conversion cost. So there's our three product costs, even though we've grouped together conversion cost, direct materials, direct labor and factory overhead. But we've got our three product costs in there. And our job really is to figure out how much cost should we assign to the products that got finished and transferred into the assembly department. That's really what this whole process is about. And we're going to make a journal entry to transfer out that amount when we're done. So the first thing we need to do in step 1 is account for whole units. These are units that, if we're thinking about making ice cream sandwiches, right? So how many whole ice cream sandwiches would we have made, even though at the beginning, at the end, some of the ice cream sandwiches are not completed yet? In terms of the whole number of units that we are processing, that's what this is about. So in the book, they've given you this information. So we had 10,000 units that were there at the beginning of the month. Again, they weren't complete, or they wouldn't still be in work in process. They were still in the process of being made into a product, whether it's ice cream sandwiches or hot dogs or pencils or whatever it is. There's tons of videos out there on this type of product. Transferred in during the month was 250,000 units, and we transferred out 220,000 units, which means that at the end, if we had 10,000 plus the 250 minus the 220, our ending was 40,000 units. 40,000 units. Now, they told us in the textbook that these were 50% complete with respect to direct materials and 30% complete with respect to conversion costs. So we'll take that into account now when we calculate the equivalent units. So the concept of equivalent units is, when we're talking about a percentage as being done, we need to convert that into how many units that would be. So all the units that were transferred out, which was 220,000 units, are all done. They wouldn't have been transferred out if they weren't done. But what we had is, at the end, we had 40,000 units that were only partially done. So if we take direct materials first, we have 40,000 units that were in ending work in process inventory in this department times 50%. I'm going to show the formula, and then I'm going to calculate it here, which is 40,000 times 0.5 or 50%. So those 40,000 units were 50% complete with regard to materials. So in other words, in the following month, we're going to add another 50% to these to finish them up. With regard to conversion cost, this was 30% complete. So, in other words, if we take the 40,000 times 0.3, that's the equivalent of making 12,000 units from start to finish. Even though it's 40,000 units, because it's only 30% complete, it's the equivalent of 12,000 units. So our total equivalent units for the whole month, to finish the ones we finished and then work on the ones that did not get finished, is 240,000 for materials, 232,000 units, this is units, for conversion cost. That's step 2. So now that we have our equivalent units, we can calculate the cost per equivalent units for direct materials and for conversion costs. We have to do these separate. So we had 7,500. I'm going to link to my schedule up above here. We had 7,500 in direct materials in the beginning work in process, and we had 49,850 in conversion cost at the beginning. Then during the month, we brought in 112,000 in direct materials. This is from the debit side of that T account. And we brought in $616,000 worth of conversion cost. So our total for direct materials is 120,000. Our total for conversion cost is 665,850. Again, that's the dollars we spent on direct materials and conversion cost during the month. If I now bring over and link to my equivalent units calculation, which is the 240,000 for materials and the 232,000 units in conversion cost, I can now get a conversion cost per equivalent unit by merely dividing the cost by the number of units. In other words, if it cost me $120,000 in materials to make the equivalent of 240,000 units, that's 50 cents per unit. If it cost me $665,000 to make the equivalent of 232,000 units, that's $2.87 per unit. We need to calculate this so that we can apply it to the ones that got transferred out and the ones that are still sitting in work in process. So now I can move on to step number 4, where I can use those completed units, both for materials and for conversion cost, and then multiply it times my calculated cost per equivalent unit. And when I do that, I get $110,000 of materials that went with the 220,000 units that got finished. I also had 631,409 for the conversion cost that went with the 220,000 units that got finished. So there's my number to transfer from this T account for the cutting department into the next department, which happens to be the assembly department. I can prove my number by doing the same thing for materials that are still sitting in work in process at the end. It's the equivalent of 20,000 units times 50 cents. So that's $10,000. And my conversion cost was the equivalent of 12,000 units times my conversion cost per equivalent unit. That gives me 34,441. When I add these guys together, I get 44,441. And now I can post that to my journal entry. And I'm just going to make a real quick one. Actually, this shouldn't be finished goods. This should be work in process assembly. And this one is work in process cutting. And I'm going to debit the assembly department, which is going to make it go up, and credit the cutting department to make it go down. So this is the journal entry to record transferring these costs out of the cutting department and into the assembly department. Now, the good thing about this is I can post this. Let me make this smaller, and I know it's small, but it's okay. If I post that journal entry, which is the credit to this work in process account, and then if I balance out the T account, and I should end up with a debit balance. This is an inventory account. I should get the balance I calculated for ending work in process. So the cool thing about this type of a calculation is if you mess something up, this isn't going to balance. And it does balance now because we transferred 741,409 out of work in process cutting, and it leaves a balance with the exact dollar amount we calculated in step 4. So now what we can do is we can prepare a process cost summary. We have everything we need on this schedule to prepare the cost summary. This is in your book. I'll leave this here so you can look at it, make sure that you have the numbers. And so the process cost summary is going to look like this. And what we're doing is we are, in effect, I'll make it bigger we're telling the reader all of the debits that came into that work in process T account, and then the credit plus the ending balance is going to match. So this is the switch company. This is a process cost summary. And by the way, this is not part of problem 16.4b. This is actually problem 16.5b. But I just wanted to illustrate it so you can tie together these numbers and get a feel for that. So this is for the month ended January 31, 2020. We had our beginning work in process of materials, 7,500. Our beginning work in process of conversion costs was 49,850. So there's our beginning balance in the T account. Then we added 112,500 in materials and 616,000 in conversion cost. So we total those together, and then we add them all up and we get 785,850. Again, this is the debit side of the T account, just summarized. Then, down below, we're going to say what happened to it. So we called this this number up here, the 785, the total cost to account for. And then down here, we're going to do the total cost accounted for. So transferred out, we transferred out, this is the 220,000 units that got transferred out, is $110,000 in materials and 631,400 in conversion cost. These are the numbers that we calculated over here. Actually, let's do 409 since that's what we got. I'll just link it, which means when we add these together, our total transferred out cost was 741,409. That was our journal entry, if you remember. And then for the direct materials that were left in ending work in process, that's going to be the $10,000 and in materials and the 31,441 in conversion cost. So if we add these together, we get the 44,441, and when we add them up, 785,850, and it balances to what we did above. That is the complete process of what we're doing in Chapter 16. Practice. Do that problem again, and I would do it along with the video. Try doing it on your own, and then move on to the A problem for problem 16-4A. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.